Welcome to those people who are joining. We'll just give it a minute whilst we wait for people to join the meeting on Zoom. Thanks also, we're just waiting. We'll give it another minute for people to join the meeting tonight. Welcome to the Campaign Against Climate Change hosted TUC online fringe meeting. Give it another minute or so whilst people are joining us on the Zoom meeting tonight, this afternoon even. Kathy, we are hoping, Kathy's asked a question about the possibilities of people joining in the discussion tonight, so attendees who are joining. We're hoping to be able to do that, Kathy, and we'll get going in approximately a minute. So welcome to everybody who's joined us so far. If people do have any questions or comments that they want to stick in the chat, if you're on the call and you press participants, you'll be able to see, or sorry, if you press the chat, you'll be able to see the questions. So hi Tony, thanks for joining from Gateshead. And from Hull, Anthony, from Norwich, Wendy, from Glasgow, and Adrian, I can't work out where you're from. Okay, so Claire's just giving a bit of advice, and we have Oxford and we have Liverpool and Carlisle, and the Hazards campaign joining us as well. And from Ireland, from County Down, from Essex University, from Birmingham. This is fantastic. Please keep introducing yourself. And Wakefield and Wolf from Norwich, that's great. And Nottingham. Poole in Dorset. Hello to Mark and to Martin and to Crew, to Swansea Unison. That's excellent. That's lovely. Do keep introducing yourself. And I think I'd like to start the meeting. Welcome to Paynton, City of Yew and Greater Merseyside, and Manchester. Lovely. You can read it. You don't need it read by me. Welcome to all our attendees. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Suzanne Jeffery, and I am chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change and also chair our trade union group. We're hosting tonight's TUC online fringe meeting with the title of Climate Jobs and Global Solidarity, Workers Mobilising Against Climate Breakdown. Let me just say a few words by way of introduction to what we're hoping to get out of the meeting, and then I'm going to bring in some of our speakers tonight. So during the COVID crisis, the climate crisis has continued unabated. I think we've got some very incredibly visible signs of that happening globally at this moment in time. Obviously, the climate fires in the west coast of America are very much front and centre of what we're seeing. But within the global south, there are a whole series of floods that are impacting communities that have been taking place over the course of the last couple of months. And, you know, the change in seasons, the locust swarms that are affecting East Africa. Pretty much around the globe, we are seeing impacts of extreme weather events. That Greenland ice sheet, we're informed today, has begun to melt even further. This time last year, when we held a similar meeting in person at the TUC conference, we sat in our meeting having just heard that the TUC had passed that motion for a 15-minute stoppage in solidarity with the biggest global climate strike that the world had seen up until that moment in time. And on that day, hundreds of thousands of trade unionists in this country stood alongside young people and joined others around the world in that magnificent climate strike. It clearly was having the impact of pushing climate up the agenda of the trade union movement. It was clearly having the impact of winning that debate about the fact that climate change is a workers' issue. And it was a good place to be this time last year. Obviously, we've had the COVID crisis, And I should also say we were preparing for COP26 in November of this year. Obviously, we've had the COVID crisis between then and now, and we have those interconnecting crises of COVID, of climate, and then a jobs crisis piled on top of that. I think it's clear that we have to grab this situation and demand the jobs needed to tackle the climate crisis. And that does mean the transition of our energy systems, our heating systems, the transition of our transport systems, and food and land use. It also means that massive investment in care, in the low carbon economy, the jobs that make a difference. And we saw that very quickly during the COVID crisis. Perhaps it's also worth reminding us that we need to do that in the context of climate justice and in the tradition of international solidarity, where we stand alongside our brothers and sisters globally. That is part of the tradition of the trade union movement. But I think that we have to, and hopefully that's what we're looking at in tonight's meeting. How do we do that? It does feel like there's a bit of a crisis of leadership in terms of the trade union movement stepping up and making those demands for a green recovery and a just transition at this absolutely crucial moment of a climate crisis and a jobs and COVID crisis as well. So that's really what we're trying to focus on tonight. Very early on when we joined the call, somebody asked if it's going to be possible for people to talk on this call. We have currently around 90 people who are on the call at this meeting today. That's a fair number of people. We're hoping after our first two speakers to bring a couple of people in to ask questions or to make very short comments or contributions. But can I just say that we won't get through the meeting if people make long contributions. So let's ask if people can make shorter contributions after our speakers. There's one hand gone up already. After our speakers, our first two speakers, so we can bring some people in on the call, as well as the people who are in front of you on the webinar. Absolutely, Jenny has made the comment that you can use chat, as well as if you want to put questions in chat for our speakers, or if you put questions in the Q&A, I can direct them to the speakers as well. So let's use all three options. I'm going to ask for Jane to speak first. Jane's going to speak for about 8 minutes. Jane is the Vice President of the CWU, and Jane will explain what she's going to speak about. After Jane has spoken, I'm going to bring Dorothy straight in. I'll introduce her first, and then we'll see what questions our participants, our audience have got, as well as what's in the chat. So Jane, off you go.
Thanks, Suzanne, and good afternoon to everyone who's watching online and taking part in the chat. And I think it's really quite a good turnout. I know it's difficult at this time of day for people. But where I wanted to start on, and I've always been active in the trade union movement since I was really younger, joined the post office age 17, rep 18, 39 years, still here, still standing, and still fighting on loads of things. But to me, the pandemic absolutely has crystallised what is so wrong in our systems and our society. If you look at how we've dealt with it, not only in this country, in other countries, you will see some of the infrastructure that we've lost over the years and sort of the localised nature of how we operate. And to me, the pandemic has made everything totally local, and local in terms of how we get solutions. As I say, I'm a postal worker. We've always support the green agenda. We try and do our best. We know employers, negotiate with Royal Mail and BT, also have huge, large fleets. And obviously they'll respond to regulation. If there's regulation that says you all have to be electric next week, all companies would do it, respond to that. Then we get on to sort of the trade union movement. And you find that sometimes climate change is an add-on. It's a luxury, but we're entrenched in what's happening in our own bit of industry of where we represent. So there will be a conflict in terms when people try and resolve stuff. So when we do talk about just transition, what do we mean? So if you're in a steelworks getting told to close, we're saying we want green jobs. What do we mean by just transition? And I think in terms of where the economy is at the moment, the Tories in particular, so much better Labour under Corbyn, and it was inspiring on the climate agenda and the green agenda. But under the Tories, it's the market rules. So it's whatever the market wants to do will be the, what it produces, and it will resolve it, and we'll have some regulations. Well, that is obviously a short-term situation, and we need to look at how we have short-term solutions as well as the long-term. And that means a planned economy. That means we have to look at what we are going to do and can change, and where that just transition will come in. So for workers in the nuclear industry to say, right, I agree with climate change, shutting down nuclear and a just transition, they need to know, how will that just transition be? How will they be reskilled? What guarantees for them? What decent wages? What no exploitation? That sort of side of things. So when we look individually at all our sectors, we all know what needs to be done, but nothing ever gets joined together enough to mean there's massive progress across everywhere. So you find individuals, households, they do their best. They try and be as green as possible and all the rest, but it's the big ticket stuff. So you would think pandemic, to me, public transport, we should have more public transport, more than we had before the pandemic. It should be, cleaned and all the rest and that, and people should be able to use it and it'd be cheaper. But what do? In this pandemic, we say to people, get in your car and go to work. Don't go in contact. And there is, to me, a feeling that climate change, even though everyone knows it's fundamental basis of how we will survive on this planet, it's been pushed down the agenda. And no one is going to resolve that. And that's why I think it's so important, the meetings like this, that start talking to workers, but start pushing our own leaders to not only just speak about being in favour of green jobs and climate and carbon neutral, etc., but to actually start delivering that in terms of employers and how we go about it. So the protests, the demonstrations are brilliant, and we need to connect with workers to go on that. But sometimes we need to make sure that workers are putting pressure within their own employers about what they can do and how they can be to the front of it. And I think that's where we are at the moment in terms of making it possible to get to that just transition. So that means, to me, I looked at all the websites, majority of the unions who are part of the TUC. You go on the website, there's hardly anything on there about climate change, green jobs, anything like that. You look at the statements for this TUC, and I think it's a couple of sentences amongst other statements. So I think the profile and what we're doing needs to become more important. And we do need the high level debate of any recovery that's not the normal has to include the climate change issues and the issue of zero emissions, etc. It has to be part of it. Otherwise, we will continue to fail the next generation and the people moving forward. Do I think it's possible? Yes, I do. But it does mean that we have to break some of the sectionalism of trade unionists to start seeing where it can be a benefit for a worker in a fuel industry to actually have just transition to new jobs, because we do need that moving forward of the new jobs. So we will continue to fight for it, but I think we have to fundamentally start looking now at whether we can get people putting into practice what we need, and moving forward with workers amongst them to deliver that agenda. Because I do think we're a bit of a stagnant period, but I may be wrong, but I do think the trade union movement needs to take more notice of it. So that's my contribution. But the CW will continue to campaign, we'll work with climate change, etc. We'll do all that, but I think we now have to bring more together who can make that real change, and that real change with business, and that's from the ground as well, to those people actually putting it on the front of their agenda. You can't have a recovery without dealing with the climate change issues. You just can't. You'll always keep coming back to the issues that is happening on the planet, which is a major problem short term as well as long term. So thanks for being invited, Suzanne. Hope that's contributed to it and people can understand where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Jane. I'm going to move straight over to Dorothy. Dorothy Guerrero is Head of Policy and Advocacy at Global Justice Now. And Dorothy, I think, is going to build on some of the comments that Jane has made, but put it in perhaps a broader global perspective, and certainly in a perspective of climate justice and international solidarity. So welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you, Suzanne. And indeed, I will start from where Jane has left as well. It is a reality, I think many are already discussing, that we are facing a huge dual challenge at the moment. And the first is that of ensuring that COVID-19 recovery is just and green. And in fact, we should not go back to the previous normal, as that normal meant death. It is a maldevelopment, climate-frying development that governments and business has been pursuing for many, many decades and centuries, actually. Unfortunately, many discussions on recovery obscures both the climate crisis and racialized inequalities, which the crisis exposed. And we have seen that very, very clearly here in the UK and also globally. And those inequalities, racial, gender inequalities, must be addressed. The other side of the challenge is on making the various climate justice positions transformative. So it's not enough that we talk about just transition, but we have to ensure and discuss that just transition is socially transformative. At this point, I think it should go beyond the minimalist position that only focuses on reformist change with green jobs or social protection with trainings and consultation. We should push it further and build a new kind of climate politics, which is not defensive or beyond defensive, and shows that the priority is not just about protecting the short-term interests of vulnerable workers, but also that of building a future systems where people can pin their hopes on. So that's a major ask. We must, of course, continue to force governments and corporations to prioritize justice, sustainability, and the protection of rights and livelihoods. And I think linked with what I mentioned as building new systems of politics, in that process, there is a big ask from us, from all the movements, to reclaim democracy, ecologism, feminism, and socialism. We need to ensure that the just transition we are pushing for is something that people can say, oh, I want to be part of that. I must join that. So beyond protest as well. So it is also about reimagining and proposing a different kind of future, a more positive and hopeful kind of future for everyone. So it is an advantage already that trade unions are still strong on internationalism and global solidarity. Those are the pillars that needs to be strengthened in the climate movement, actually. For many years of my work, I've been quite familiar and have been crisscrossing in the discussions between the climate movement and also with labor unions. So based from those previous discussions, I would propose or at least mention what unities do we need to build and to bridge. We need to ground our politics or our climate politics as I mentioned, it must bring hope, it must be aspirational. And it will be very difficult to inspire and mobilize people and build movements if our narrative is not centered on hope for a more just and sustainable world. That it should guide us to think of alternative forms of producing, consuming, and relating to nature. Climate change is not just about environment degradation. It is first and foremost a crisis about the relationship between humans to each other. That's why there's exploitation, and there is that element of class still. And I wanted to put that back strongly in the discussion. And at the same time, the problem how humans relate with nature. So it's both an environment and a social crisis. So there are two poles at the moment. If we look at the positions of climate justice movements and trade unions. For most trade unions, the discourse is on assuring that workers' jobs are protected. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we should highlight our sector's demands and needs. But and from the environment movements as well, there is a need to build understanding with activists that to go beyond the focus also on immediate closure of coal mines, coal-fired power station. I agree very much. Coal, all the coal, oil, gas must stay on the ground. But at the same time, shifting to renewable energy in whatever form doesn't happen overnight. There must be an acknowledgement among climate movements as well that for a deep and just transition, it requires changes not only in the sources of energy, but also in who owns and controls various components of the energy system as part of the distribution of power and resources. And within the climate movement, we are saying that the major problem is that many environmentalists are not yet on this discourse, and we have to bring them to this discourse, that it's not just about closing down coal power plants, but also if we wanted renewable energy, we have to talk about who owns the land, who owns resources, and who has access to them. So for that, we can look at the discourses of feminists, the environmentalists and socialists combined, and bring the best features of these movements to strengthen the just transition course. Some of the challenges that I see for the UK's hosting of COP26 is that, one, we have to show that the UK is not a climate leader. In fact, the UK is the 5th in terms of worst greenhouse gas emitter. It has historical responsibilities and huge responsibilities at the moment. Its reported emission even hides its full responsibilities, like those from fossil fuel companies, its aid programs which funds carbon emitting activities globally, trade, shipping, and aviation, which are not part of its computation of its emission. So the net zero emission of the current government is by 2050 is even groundless. So when we also think of lobbying as a strategy, we must also recognize that there are limits to lobbying as a strategy. So we must build strong, committed, and long-lasting movements that more directly confront the system supported by unequal free trade treaties, extractivist investments, and profiteering false climate solution schemes. And lastly, we have to call for the cancellation of Global South's foreign debts, because it doesn't make sense that 69 of the poorest countries still put a lot of their money for this appropriate allocation of their funds of their national budget to that allocation. And with COVID-19 as well, the economic impacts to all the southern economies are huge. They've lost livelihoods, they've lost manufacturing, they've lost tourism, and the way that they could recover, especially for conservative governments, is to open the economy to more mining, to more business, to more exploitative manufacturing. So how can we, how can the trade union movement also join that call for that cancellation? And then I was reminded, and this would be my last point as well, when I was in a conference in South Africa, some trade union leaders asked me, what will the movements in the UK do when we demand that mining plants or all the assets will be nationalized and will be taken without compensation or with or without compensation? Will the unions in the UK support us? So I think we can also discuss that in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Dorothy, so much. Let's do this. Let's take some questions from our audience. So if you did want to ask a question, pop your hand up. So anyone who's not sure to do it, I can't take everyone, but pop some hands up. So that's going to the participants and then sticking your hand up, raising your hand if you want to ask a question. While Patrick still has his hand up. So Patrick, I'm going to ask Claire, who's facilitating the call, to unmute you and bring you in so you can ask your question. I'm going to remind people to be short. And also I want to just put a question to Jane that appeared in the chat, which is about the position of the trade union movement. Why does it not explicitly support XR? Now, Jane can't answer for the trade union movement, but can offer some thoughts. All right, so Patrick accidentally put his hand up. So in which case we've got Eleanor. Eleanor, would you like to come in and ask your questions? That's Eleanor Simon. Yeah, okay, off you go, Eleanor.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I was just, thank you so much for organizing this French meeting. I think it's really, really important. And I was just wondering, like, I'm in the UCU at the University of Sheffield, and we've been trying to incorporate like the climate issues in our like negotiation agenda. And I just wondered, like, how we can like build towards like calls for linking up climate change issues and transition, the just transition, sorry, with like workplace demands. So, for example, like we are pushed into like unsustainable lifestyles, but obviously with the workloads that we are facing, it's impossible to do the things that we need to do on an individual basis. So I think we really should be linking up. And I was wondering if the panelists could, kind of draw out a little bit more how we would call for those demands in practical terms in our workplaces. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. I'm going to take a couple more. Patrick still has his hand up. Does Patrick Mayer want to come in? Okay, in which case can I take Josh Largent? Okay, off you go, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy. I think the introduction there was really fantastic. I think you really hit the nail on the head for me. I think it is really the logic of sort of capitalism, of accumulation of wealth and resources that is driving climate change. And I think there's a massive part of the climate movement and a big part of the trade union movement that are quite aware of this as well. I think because of that, we do really need quite radical proposals. I think we are getting really to the point where the time to act is now, and it is right now. And we can't sort of keep jumping through the hoops of the government and the fossil fuel lobbyists and so on. I think the fossil fuel industry really need their assets seizing. They don't know how to use them responsibly, and that comes down to the workers. But how can we engage with workers who are in these most polluting sectors as climate activists and trade unionists, and really engage with these people? Because I think this is a really important question at the moment: is how do we actually engage with the workers? When, I think quite historically, the climate movement and the argument for jobs have been quite counter-opposed, apart from the work that Campaign Against Climate Change has been doing. So mainly it's just about how do we go about doing that practically when we're not in them industries or sectors.
Josh, excellent question. And just to add to Josh's question, because it's not simply people that are in, I think it's quite important. It's not simply people that are in the fossil fuel industries that are losing their jobs. It's people across the economy that are losing their jobs. And there is an absence of the big call for moving those people into jobs that are part of a green recovery. I'm going to take a couple more. Gwyneth Farley. Gwyneth, are you ready to ask a question? Okay.
Sorry.
Gwyneth?
Hi. Sorry.
Hi. Off you go.
I didn't realise I hadn't got all that set up. Right, sorry. Yeah, so Dorothy said that if we're going to talk about renewables, we need to be talking about who owns and controls the power and resources, which to some degree we do know. Again, talking about carbon intense industries, we do know a great deal about that. We also know who owns our wider industries. And Jane said we need to start pushing our own leaders and employers to start delivering. So my question is, how do we lobby push our employers through? Excuse me. I work for Liverpool City Council, and I'm Unison's Unison co-environmental rep. Only just started, new to the to that post, and it's very slow and difficult work to get to make any movement with. Well, first of all, with the trade union, with Unison itself, we're just actually fighting for facility time to start with, and we're trying to fight for facility time for Unison reps throughout the Northwest as well. Let alone get the authority to to move on certain points that in the timescale that we have. I just worry it's I know it's not impossible. I'm not going to use that word, because if I thought it was impossible, I wouldn't be here. I have to believe we can do it, but I just would like to know some more around how to persuade employers and industries.
Thanks, Gwyneth, and within our own unions as well, to have it at the top of the agenda, as you rightly said, Gwyneth. I'm going to take, if we can be short, I'm going to take Stephen and then Austin, and then we're going to go back to Jane and Dorothy for some feedback on those questions. So can I take, I'm sorry, I think we lost somebody there. Stephen Jordan. Okay, if we've lost Stephen, have we lost Austin? Okay, in which case I will come back to some of the people with their hands up. Let's take, Jane, do you want to come back on some of those questions, please? So you need to unmute yourself.
Right, okay, just turn my mic on. Since I'm a chair all day, I hate the word unmuted, is put your mic on. Right, just deal with a couple of things, and I think this is quite a good way to have sort of, not a dishonest debate that we dishonestly debate stuff, but people are asking intense questions in terms of practically how do we deal with stuff. So the issue of Extinction Rebellion, right, in terms of how our union have dealt with it, we started off the dialogue with our national executive, which obviously will start the policy, and which was basically to get them to agree climate change does exist. So you get rid of all the doubters of it's not real, today's cold, so therefore it isn't. And then it was, what is the difference on the organisations? And it's like any big issue, you will have different organisations. If you look at the anti-racism movement, it's not just one organisation that deals with everything. There's different facets of it and all the rest. So to me, why do the trade unions not sort of get involved? I'd say for Extinction Rebellion, it looks a bit different. It looks like it's not connected to anything they would do. And to me, that is the wrong way of viewing people who protest, because otherwise you'll always narrow it down to just someone who totally agrees with everything. And also the argument about direct action. I agree in direct action. I agree in any action you can get, you should be doing, because usually that's when you do get the intention. But is that just a constant solution to the problem? So if you're a worker, you go on, you believe in Extinction Rebellion, direct action, you get arrested, you go back to work, you tell your employer, you usually will be sacked. You know, for some people, it's as stark as that. But does it mean that it's not worth supporting as an organisation? No, it doesn't. But it's just their tactics of how they're doing stuff. In terms of, and I know there's been a big push and there's loads of environmental reps who have been set up, and there's an argument of that, you know, they should have facilities, should be illegal facilities. Within our organisation, our health and safety reps do the environmental stuff as well. So you've got sort of the legal response there, but the trouble is we still don't deal with it as centrally enough as what you do on the environmental side of the health and safety. But, you know, given the health and safety is in law, it does help in loads of ways. And it's like everything, I think, I mean, I can sit down and you could ask me what is needed in my sector, which is a postal sector, which is, you know, X amount of vans going around the country, delivering to the same address, blah, blah, blah. And I could say what our green solution would be to that, you know, even to the point that if you mail something and it's going to a local address, it was done years ago, it never even went outside of that office, it got delivered. It didn't then go down a motorway, come back, you know, that sort of stuff. We went from rail to road, and now we're talking about going back to rail. But it's usually based on the economics of what that company can get on a best deal, not on environmental issues. So when I say we should challenge the leadership, it's those people who are in, and that includes myself, who are in negotiating deals on terms and conditions and the way people work, should be raising these issues as well, and should be negotiating on these issues, because there is responsibility. But while we're in this country, the way we're set up and the economic process of this country allows business to do what they like unless it's in regulation, that can be hard, but you can win. You can win those changes with a company, you know, in terms of the long term. And also some people like it because it gives them sort of kudos. Look at us, we're being very green, very climate changed. So to me, it's a bit of everything. It's leaderships coming together and putting forward an agenda that they take into the bargaining. It's also about people protesting and being out and bringing people together. Young people showing the way, to be honest. You know, to be showing us what is the right thing we should be doing for them. Because literally, it's my age group who've seen the devastation of the world and have moved stuff on in the terms of how it is now. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but I just think we need to make sure every angle we can do that forwards our agenda should be utilised, whether it's supporting demos, direct action, taking it into the boardrooms, making sure companies do it, demanding the government to do stuff, and if not, go at, you know, to move aside. If school students can change the decisions of the Tories, we should be, as a society, be able to have a green agenda where workers know they're not going to get thrown on the scrap heap, and those jobs are there, retrained, and decent jobs, decent pay. And to be honest, let's look at retirement again, and let's look at shorter working weeks. Who says we have to work 40, 50 hours a week? Who says that for a decent pay? So there is stuff we can do, but at the moment we tend to be very insular. But by keeping these debates going and making sure that we're at all the demonstrations and at the protests, we can see a difference. And I think they will have to address it, but it's better we address it on our agenda rather than just letting them mess around on the edges that suits them for their profit. Okay, hope that answers some of the questions.
Thanks, Jane. Dorothy, can I bring you in to answer some of the questions? I've noticed there's a lot of hands. I'll take a few more speakers and then I'll come back to those hands. But Dorothy, some of the questions that were asked, please.
Yes, I think some of the questions are actually answering themselves, like how to bring the different campaigns together, how to ensure intersectionalities in our campaigns. But I think I wanted to focus as well that when we, in fact, when we talk about climate emergency, it is not just the workers losing their jobs, but it's also the entire livelihood. I mean, I came from the Philippines. Every time there's a huge typhoon there, the whole coconut industry will go down, because you will have a whole island where, if devastated by a typhoon, all the coconuts will be devastated, and it needs 5 years before coconuts could grow back again. So it's not just about immediate jobs, but also we're talking about the future. So I think I will go back to the point of strengthening global solidarity, and I think in this aspect also introduce or push for that understanding of reciprocal solidarity, because we need to learn from the South and also from the various movements as well, and the emphasis on direct action, because I strongly believe my activism started in kicking a dictatorship in the Philippines, and from that lesson I learned very early in life that sometimes before a policy gets debated in Parliament, we first set that in the Parliament of the street. So that's why I mentioned that we have to continue and strengthen that Parliament of the street, that we need to push for agendas, build our discourse there, debate with each other, and strengthen our arguments and then our politics, and then push for policies. And all of this must be done simultaneously. And that we still need to demand more from our government, and not just on the policy level, but also including changing our governments. In the Global South, that is what we always link, the problem of a campaign, and at the same time, the fact that our governments are following a kind of development model that is where the poor, the workers, the environment are sacrificed. So when in the pursuit of development, the idea is always the savior are foreign investments. And including in this country, I was very surprised that when we talk about investments, it's about always transnational corporations, while people do invest as well with their labor. Nature invests as well with giving abundant energy to make plants grow and all that. So in terms of all this interconnectedness, that's why I mentioned in my talk that we need to merge together the best aspects of environmentalism, feminism, democracy, the looking at ethics as well. I think I would also like to say that when we think of how the government is behaving at the moment, there is a real push for privatizing everything. So, and also in the discourse of just transition, there is a strengthened argument now. Before COVID, the question is just that before you could do a just transition, first you needed to have access to those resources, to have access to those facilities. The question now is that there's how will decisions be made? So and how can you do a transition from one form of energy to another if you don't own the assets, or if you don't own the different processes that produce and redistribute energy as well? So all those are very, very complicated, but not impossible to intervene on. And I think one strength of the movements here in the UK is that we are quite good in developing resources to make people be educated. So the political education going on, especially at this period, is very, very inspiring. 10 years ago, when I was invited to speak here, I lament at the fact that people shy away from politics. I think now there's a different situation, that people are more radical in their cores, in their calls, and I think we have to push harder and break the ceiling in our demands.
Dorothy, thank you very much, and thank you to all the contributions that are in the chat. There's so much valuable information and discussion in the chat, so many issues to discuss. I'm going to take our other two speakers in now, and then we'll go back and see. We'd planned for a slightly shorter meeting, but it does look like perhaps if we roll the meeting on for a while, because there is so much more still to be said and discussed. So I'm going to bring in our other two speakers, but I just want to say before I do that, I think every union, we have to, as activists in our own union, fight for decent policies in terms of solidarity with the climate movement, XR, the schools climate strikers, and other activists from the climate movement. But we also have to fight for those policies about what does a just transition look like in our own unions. Jane mentioned it. Every union should have a plan for how we transition our own workplaces. But we've got to get that demand out. It is time for climate jobs. It is time to transition the economy, and we're not hearing those voices. So we have to get those voices out from the trade union movement. I think somebody mentioned earlier on about young people in the service sector losing their jobs. Why are they not then moved to employment in the green recovery that we need to transition and tackle the climate crisis? But that voice is so mute at this moment in time. We need to raise it up. Stuart, in a second, I'm going to bring you in, so don't disappear for too long. You can disappear now, but not because Charlotte's going to speak first. Our next two speakers are Charlotte Tovsky, who has been involved with UKSCN, the school climate strikers, was based in Manchester and has worked nationally in terms of UKSCN. Is now off to university in Preston. Is going to bring us up to date with what the young people are doing. We need to stand in solidarity. It's not their fight, it's our fight together. And then I'm going to bring in Stuart, and I'll introduce Stuart just before he speaks. So Charlotte, off you go, please.
So hi, I'm Charlotte Lastoweckyi and I'm part of UKSCN, which is the UK Student Climate Networks, and we're the people that have been organising the school strikes up and down the country. Over the past year and a half, young people around the world have been organising, planning actions, as the government have not comprehended nor expressed the urgency or the severity of the climate crisis as we know it. Over lockdown, young people have been mobilising, doing online actions and organising for our next wave action, which is the 25th of September. And each location is assessing what they can do during this current situation. Some places are doing online things like conferences like this, while others are doing physical actions. So it would be like keeping up to date with their social media pages to see what they're doing. And we want to put the climate crisis back on the forefront of people's minds, because over this time period, people have kind of forgotten about it, even though there's fires all around the globe and flooding. It's just not talked about nearly as much. Last year on the 20th of September, we saw the biggest climate mobilisation in history, with millions of people worldwide joining the fight for climate justice for everyone. And a big thank you to the trade unions who supported that, and the people that came to that last year, because it was a big help, just having adults and young people standing together in solidarity. But it wasn't enough to shift the public view. It was talked about for a couple of weeks, but it would kind of just died down after a while, and it wasn't enough to make the government care about the climate crisis. So we as young people are coming together again, and it would be amazing to have your support and you supporting your local strike groups. On the 25th, we're actually calling the government to build back better, which is a campaign being run by Green New Deal UK, and focusing on recovery from COVID-19 as a society. So securing health and needs for everyone in the UK, protect and invest in our public services, rebuilding society with a transformative Green New Deal, invest in people, build solidarity and communities across borders. Seeing the enormous changes made by the government during this period so swiftly leaves a lot to be said on their reaction around issues of the climate movement, and we must actively facilitate a sustainable and ethical community recovery for all. Every crisis needs to be treated like a crisis, and yet the government continues to put the economy ahead of people's lives in both the COVID situation and the climate crisis situation. I've just started uni, and when I graduate, I want there to be green, sustainable jobs for myself and for people of my generation. The normal that we knew before is not good enough, and we can't continue to go on like that. And then the young people shouldn't have to suffer due to the negligence of governments and people in general. These green jobs that will be created hopefully will help create a better world for everyone, and the climate crisis affects people differently. So the poorer communities get affected worse. The people that the government extorts, countries that get extorted for their oils and their minerals, they're experiencing the climate crisis a lot worse than us. So we have to say that we are in a place of privilege at the moment, and if we do not take action, then what is the point? So on the 21st, please come and just support your local strike groups. This is a pressing time, and we need everyone's support at the moment. Just to have climate justice for all, we have to speak for the people that cannot speak for themselves. We have to speak for the countries who are being just absolutely destroyed by the climate crisis. Yeah.
Thanks, Charlotte. Charlotte, could I ask you to post into the chat anywhere where people can go to find out what might be happening in their local area? We've talked a lot about the Parliament of the Street, so it's an opportunity to take those initiatives. I'd like to introduce Stuart. Stuart Graham is a social worker services vice convener for Unison in Glasgow City. Stuart will talk about what his union branch have been doing and the Trades Council in Glasgow have been doing, and also about the broader mobilisation. COP26 was to be in Glasgow in November of 2020, now is to be in Glasgow November 2021. So Stuart will address how we can mobilise and what we need to do to start mobilise, as well as what his union branch and Trades Council have been doing in Glasgow. So Stuart, welcome.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Suzanne, and cheers everyone for inviting me along. Suppose in order to try and frame this, and maybe to try and to engage with some of the points that were raised earlier, the lack of leadership from within the trade union movement has been quite staggering on some of the climate issues. And like Jay and I went and had a look at some of the big unions to see what was their update in the last, recent or the last campaign they were involved in. Some of them have still got the 2019 September 20th climate strike as their last engagement with the climate agenda. So that kind of shows you that they're not keeping up. It doesn't seem to be at the forefront. But I do think that the trades councils, particularly the Trades Council in Glasgow, and the fact that trades councils can be a wee bit more political or can be a bit sharper with what their demands are, might be the route to bring in the bigger players within the trade union movement, because everyone can, speak for their own branch and get their own branch involved. But it's about making that, taking that horizontally within your own union movement and escalating that then to get a campaign perspective, or to get them to affiliate or to take more of a role within the local trades council campaign. So I suppose, given the fact that we knew that Glasgow was going to be a host for the COP26, we started mobilising for this early. So Glasgow Trades Council were taking a lead in that, along with my branch, and becoming involved with the Scottish coalition as well as the UK coalition. So we'd actually run a conference on the 1st of February, which we thought we were going to be many kind of conferences in the lead up to COP that were going to be scattered all around the country, only to find out that I think ours was the first of two before everybody had to retreat into remote viewing land and participating in Zoom meetings. So essentially, we have developed over the course of the last few months a demand for free public transport in Glasgow, and we're concentrating on the buses. suppose, two reasons. It's an easier target in the sense that that's currently under the kind of powers that are available to local authorities with the Transport Act from Scotland from last year, but also because the trains have a degree of reservation to Westminster. So we've called this, and so we're branding it the Free Our City campaign, and this is a combination of Glasgow Trades Council, Glasgow Get Glasgow Moving, Divest Strathclyde, Campaign Against Climate Change Glasgow, the Scottish Youth Climate Strike. So this is a group coming together to demand that our elected representatives, and to build a coalition to make a demand for free public transport. Now, if you look at the recommendations from the UK Climate Assembly, it was just published last Thursday, and I haven't read it all. It was a pretty hefty document, 500 odd pages, but the first section is specifically about how we travel on land and really refers to buses and cars, I suppose. And the overwhelming policy recommendation from that is to invest in renewable and electric buses and trains. And I suppose free public transport isn't a new demand, but I think in the current environment, it's a demand that people need to get on board with, because it's a demand that's going to incentivize car users out of their cars. It's going to collectivize transport, because our city centres are also going to become pedestrianised as well, and particularly looking at Glasgow. If Glasgow is going to be host to COP26 next year, our current public transport isn't fit for purpose. And I suppose also in the COVID era, we're not out of the pandemic yet, so we're still within the pandemic, but COVID era public transport, we need more buses, we need a significantly greater fleet, but we don't need a bigger polluting fleet. We need a renewable fleet. Now, even at that, there's the Alexander Dennis plant and plants actually in Falkirk and Larbert that are currently under threat. These make the type of buses that we want. So just give these guys the contract and see if their jobs stop, putting jobs under threat whenever they could be quite easily turned around to a much more pragmatic use, and as actually delivering what's required. So in order to try and push this on, we've got a conference this Saturday called Imagine Buses Were Free. We've invited someone from Dunkirk Council, we've got someone from Tallinn and Estonia, because we want people to tell us not just about what the policy objectives were and how they managed to achieve that from inside, but also what people who are accessing public transport for free, what are they willing to pay? What's the payoff? What do they get in return? Because inevitably people want to know, how is this going to be funded? Is it going to be funded by some level of taxes, or is it going to be funded by polluter pays principle and some sort of progressive taxation? So there's a lot to be hammered out around this, but we genuinely want people to engage with this at every level so they can understand why this is a viable solution for Glasgow, and why, if Glasgow is the host next year, it actually needs to be a leader in implementing change. I mean, Dorothy had referred to the UK being one of the top 5 polluters. So really, we need to look to see, if we're going to introduce policies, we probably have to be willing to showcase them. And I would also, I suppose, in talking about trades councils, I've noticed over the course of the last couple of weeks, Leeds Trades Council and Battersea and Wandsworth Trades Council have also trying to start campaigns about retrofitting, mass retrofitting programs. And again, if we're looking at mass retrofitting, look at the jobs that creates. If you think about, I suppose, the tagline for this fringe meeting, it's about how do we create these jobs now, or how do we create them in the not too distant future? Not waiting for, Unison or for the GMB or Unite to try and prioritise this as their policy objective, because that's way down the line. And even if we're talking about the amount of people that some of these unions represent, they're navel gazing and talking about carbon capture and storage. And again, that's putting far too much faith in a technology that doesn't exist, and we're still going to be left with carbon that we need to do something with. So let's look at how we can make them green. If we can get a mass retrofitting campaign, can we get those campaigns replicated in every city, or every city that will carry a significant clout and can have a trades council that can operate that type of campaign? Can we get other cities around Scotland or around the UK articulating a free public transport campaign? Can we connect up these campaigns? Can we use this as a mobilisation tactic for COP26 on top of the actual UK coalition meetings and the Scottish coalition meetings? because we want you to come, guys. But, you know, I mean, we actually need to get something happening. If people are going to come to Glasgow, let's not just have it for another cheering session or for another demonstration session. And particularly if we're going to have, you know, anything between 30 and 100,000 people coming to Glasgow, we genuinely need a better public transport system, because that amount of people coming will collapse it. So it's in everybody's interests that we actually have, I suppose, ready to go jobs. And again, refer back to the climate assembly. No one's trying to reinvent stuff here. There are, yes, we know that there are going to be much more difficult tasks and much more difficult and specialised jobs, but those will need to be built on once the infrastructure's there. See, right now, we need buses. We need bus drivers, people who build buses. We need retrofitters, we need installers, and we need people who can build that, and engineers who can oversee both aspects of that. That's not asking for too much, and that's not pitching things beyond what the current capacity of society is. So I think that's what we're looking at, guys. I think I've spoken for about 7 or 8 minutes, so I'll finish there. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Thanks very much. So while Stuart was speaking, Claire has posted in the chat a motion for trade unions to take up in support of mobilising for COP26 and the broader climate campaigning work that the trade union movement needs to do. I'm going to take a few more people in. I'm just going to lay out perhaps some way of sort of, you know, moving forward in the meeting. I'm going to take a few more people in. Can all of our panelists be ready to either answer a specific question that's raised and or make some concluding comments as we sort of work our way through the final questions? I do, before we move forward, want to pick up on what Stuart was talking about there. In the chat, a couple of people, Andrea has posted just recently, and then Catherine posted earlier about the work of Leeds TUC and the retrofitting campaign that they have launched and been, you know, part of. Leeds TUC doing a load of amazing work at this moment in time. Stuart, can I ask you to post into the chat some of the stuff, some of the publicity that you've been around the transport campaign that you're talking about in Glasgow, because it's very inspiring stuff. And I do think that Stuart's, you know, sort of argument there, that in local areas we could and should be taking up the transport issue, the demand for a public transport system, the jobs that are created, COVID and climate crisis, and similarly in terms of retrofitting and insulation. It's a hot day today, but we need our homes to be energy efficient, so energy use as well. Somebody might want to turn themselves to mute. I'm not quite sure who it is. So in the chat, sorry, hands up, I've seen Pauline and Ray and Stephen and Austin. So I'm going to ask Pauline. Pauline, would you like to ask your question? Pauline Fraser. Okay, so not Pauline. Ray, would you like to ask your question? Okay, Ray, off you go. Ray, you're off. Your microphone is on if you'd like to speak. Okay, no Ray, everyone's gone shy. In which case we're going to move to Stephen Wilkins. Stephen, if you unmute yourself. Stephen, is that you?
Yeah. Sorry, I hadn't actually put my hand up, but as I'm here, I will say something. I mean, I think one of the important things about the COVID crisis is that it actually gives everybody a practical demonstration about how life can change drastically and suddenly, and that, of course, this is the sort of thing that's going to happen increasingly with climate change. So it makes things more concrete when we're trying to make those kinds of arguments. I think it's also important to, we can use, I mean, people have talked about the Lucas plan in the comments, but I mean, last night's program on BBC about extinction, I think was extremely powerful. You know, we should be showing those in trade union branches. We should be pushing all these things to sort of make it absolutely clear. And I think, to be honest, when we talk about mass unemployment that's coming, it's difficult to see what else is going to be on offer if it isn't climate jobs, if it isn't dealing with climate change. And I think we can make it we can make it mainstream, so that actually it becomes trade union common sense that actually what we need is, you know, climate jobs are absolutely central to the way of dealing with the climate crisis and with the economic crisis.
Thanks, Stephen. Pauline does want to ask her question. So, Pauline, Stephen, can you mute yourself, please? And Pauline, let's bring you in for your question. I'm hoping, Pauline, that you can unmute yourself. No? Okay, right. All right. So, Ray, are you still wanting to speak? All right. Claire, thanks for this, by the way. Jenny Cooper. Jenny? Guys, please, if you're in the audience, only put your hand up if you want to speak. Jenny Cooper? Okay. Pauline, if you just press unmute. Okay, Pauline, we can hear you. All right, so Pauline, hold fire. Jenny, let's take you.
Yeah, I've unmuted, sorry. It took a while.
Okay, Jenny, off you go, because otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask quickly, I'm a trade unionist, but also a member of Extinction Rebellion, and I'm always being asked, how can we get how can we get unions and workers involved in our cause? So I take on board what somebody said in the chat. A lot of us are workers and environmental activists, and probably most of us here are, and that's why we're here. But I just was interested to know from the speakers what they think the top 1 or 2 areas are of possible consensus between environmental activists and trade union workers, especially if you imagine that in some environmental groups, and particularly I know this is one of the things that XR have been accused of, is, oh, we're a bunch of, you know, middle-class retired people that don't need to work for a living or whatever. How do we bring these two together? I'm not saying I accept that stereotype of it at all, I don't, but if that was it, what are the areas of consensus to bring people together? Because I want to take this message back from this meeting to my XR group. Thank you.
All right, great question, Jenny. Stuart, Jane, Dorothy, please, Pauline, make yourself on mute. I'm about to bring you in. Make yourself on mute, please, Pauline, so I can bring you in.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, fine. Sorry, is it Stuart who's speaking or me?
No, you just answered, that's all.
Great, okay. Yeah, my point is basically about how all the major trade unions in the UK are part of international trade unions. And that's very, very important. I'm in the NEU, and we've done lots of campaigning, getting rid of so-called private education in African countries and so forth. But to look at it from the point of grassroots, I put a comment in about, don't know if people remember, a couple of months ago or so, dockers in Genoa blocked a ship from unloading in Genoa. I think they impounded the ship, and or not quite, but anyway, they weren't allowed to unload a cargo of waste there, and it was diverted to various countries in the global south who had got wind of what had happened, and other countries didn't want the waste either, and so it got blocked. So that's very, much a grassroots thing. I mean, I don't suppose that was with the say-so of the National Union in Italy. It was those local dockers, and dockers are in a very powerful position. They have done over the years in various places. So I think it's a question of looking at what you can do from just a local point of view that can have international implications as well, and can link up global South and global North trade unions.
Thanks, Pauline. And I'm just going to point out Ray's question. She's put her question in the chat, which kind of links to what Pauline has just raised. Ray's question, global solidarity, what lessons and actions can TUC learn from sister organisations as to how to mobilise affiliated organisations for climate justice? Stories of success to share. So Ray's looking for stories of success to share. Austin, I'm going to bring in Austin, who's sort of been waiting for a long while. So let me bring in Austin. And after Austin has asked his question, Austin, if I can ask you to be reasonably brief. I'm going to then bring in our panelists to come back on those questions and perhaps make some concluding remarks. I think we'll aim to finish the meeting in the next sort of 10 minutes, otherwise we'll lose attendees who have got to go other places, and it's been quite a long meeting already. So if Austin, I don't think that's going to happen. Sorry, Austin. In which case I'm going to go straight back around, and I think I will just do it in the following order. So I think I'll take Jane first, Dorothy, and then Stuart. And we had to say goodbye to Charlotte, who had to go off for a lecture. So Jane, if I can bring you in first.
Yeah, just to round it off, because it's a huge subject, and sometimes the bigness of it puts people off, but actually we are doing what we need to be doing. We just need to do it wider. So to me, when everyone's talking about, you know, free buses, I'll talk about on the postal side, you know, about how do we deliver, etc., etc. We all know what the system needs to be, and the system isn't it. So system change, and I think Dorothy was so right about that, system change. So whether or not we still got the same electoral system, we will have to constantly fight. But when we are fighting and joining together in solidarity, that's when you raise these issues as well. And that's when you get join up, that's when you get the gains, etc., in terms of what we can provide. Because you look at postal workers, I mean, at the moment, American postal workers were fighting against letterboxes being closed so people can't vote in the upcoming election in terms of Trump, because so many people. But, you know, in terms of people walking out, so to me, some of the examples, I would say we've had walkouts over COVID and what's being provided by the employer, not safe workplaces, etc. But we have to link that, and again, back to what Dorothy says, environment, humans to each other and human to nature. How come we're in a pandemic? Do you know what I mean? That is the issue of where the system is on overdrive and crossing over. So we will face more. So to me, it's about solidarity, workers in action, coming together, and then the pressure and whatever we can do in our local places to give examples to show, and basically coming together to say, sorry, this is not the system we want to work in. This is not the system that we want to continue. And yeah, let's overthrow the lot of them, because I'm not being funny. Unless we organise differently the way, you know, we use and access democracy in that, we will get good things around the edges. But it is about people being pushed further and further out to the margins, and no ownership. And I agree, it is about, you know, the same class system and the fact that we do need to change the ownership model. But I think we can do that if we're linking everything together. So if you're on your NHS demonstrations and we're talking about climate change and the effects on that, it's all interlinked. And if we see the struggle rise, I think the climate argument comes to the fore of that, because it is what society do we want to live in the future, and for the continuation of people over hundreds and hundreds of years. We know what we're doing. We know we've got support. It's just others muddy it in terms of saying, no, it's too hard, someone else will sort it out for us. We have to say, no, we've got our agendas. Let's fight for the agenda, and let's fight for system change. To me, that's what we need to be doing. And I'm sure we will be there at COP, whatever, because I will say, one of the worrying things about COVID is where the civil liberties argument is going. I believe we can have protests and demonstrations that are safe and people can come to, but it would suit our government down to the ground to tell people they can never come out their houses again. They can't go on another protest again, because all it is the same old, same old. So let's get involved. Let's make sure we continue that involvement. And in that pressure, you will see unions change their policies. You definitely will, because it makes sense to green the workplaces, to green the industries. It's not, it's not rocket science, it's not anything. But at the moment, on a marketized global economy, it does not suit them to have workers in control of really what the real changes is that we need for our lives. So keep up the good fight and make sure that we unite every fight and every victory, whether it's pay, climate or anything like that, students, is a victory for us all. And that does show solidarity works and we can overturn the government. Okay, in not only this country, other countries. So thanks for the invite again. And I think the questions and the debate's been really interesting from people, really thought-provoking in terms of delivering what we need to deliver. So thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks, Jane. And just to echo what Tony has just written in the chat, we also need to be campaigning around those specific demands. What are the specific jobs that we need? The transport jobs, the jobs in insulation, the jobs in terms of transitioning, the energy and the care work jobs that we need to deliver our just transition or just transformation. Dorothy, I'm going to hand over to you for some answers and concluding comments from yourself.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually glad and seeing a comment on the chat about how environmentalists and trade unions can work well together to oppose a US-UK trade deal, because that is a major fight we are facing at the moment. I've read in a lot of articles that we should prevent not being a base out of the US, which is to me like an irony, that this is a trade deal between two powerful countries, and it is the first time that the UK is negotiating with another powerful country. In the past, I'm campaigning from the global south and showing the inequality in the trade negotiations. So I think it is really, really important that we also look or we understand how trade impacts the environment, and especially the investment provisions in all the new trade agreements, where even if we have good policies, if corporations can sue governments, then it will be very, very difficult to fight, because now corporations are very powerful. And I think coming from somebody who grew up in a southern country, for many people in the South, the new empires are transnational corporations. They have so much power, they can go anywhere, anytime, change everything with very, very little power that governments can do. The thing is, the asymmetry of powers between states and corporations are getting bigger. And I could see that as well getting bigger here in the North. And that is also because many governments have relinquished their duty to protect citizens, to protect residents, to protect people and communities. All the powers are now given to transnational corporations, and they're changing our laws, they're changing our system for more profiteering and all that. So we really have to focus on reducing the power of corporations. My second thing would be that, yes, climate is a fight of our life and of our lives. And the COP26 is just a latest chapter. And we have to realize as well that even the negotiations is just one aspect of fighting for climate justice, because the climate question is in everywhere. It's on trade, in the way things are produced, in the way things are consumed, and in the way that we live our lives from our waking up moment and in the time we sleep, because every choice we made are very political. So how can we also educate people that there is more needs in society than what governments are prepared to give us? And the COVID-19 lessons is strong on that, because some previously unthink of, or some previous policies and steps that the governments have taken globally were previously thought of as, oh, that will not be possible, oh, there's no budget for that. We have to make the impossible possible. Of course, it's not easy, but in the climate justice movement as well, there is also that call to demand, to be practical and demand the impossible. And then we have to simply continue doing that. Maybe my last comment is that in improving the limits or the criticisms of movements, we really have to go beyond the current limits. Like the environmental movements, the criticisms of environmental movements are being too wide. I think it is slowly being addressed, but we need more. Because people, especially migrants in this country, wanted to be and need to be involved as well. So we really need for that to happen. And also in our advocacy for global climate justice or global New Deal or whatever, we have to always think of a fair share. You know, the UK for so long have taken an unfair share in disproportionate use of resources, and also what does the Global South say, robbery of their nature. We really need to address that as soon as possible. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to share my ideas here. Thank you.
And thank you, Dorothy. Really happy that you've been here with us this afternoon. And last concluding comments from you, Stuart.
All right, thanks. I'll try to be brief. I'll address, if I can't answer your comment, Austin. I honestly can't give you an answer on the Agricultural Wages Board or how it's been happening in rural trades councils, just based on the fact that Glasgow is an urban trades council, and I haven't had any significant discussion with anyone along those lines, so I'm not going to try and make something up. Okay. The question someone else had asked, and some other people have already started answering it, about how to get how to get the unions to engage with XR. Union members are XR members. Get them along. Go to your local branch committee. Go to your union's branch committee and tell them that you're not a terrorist, that you're not to be scared of. Because I think, you know, I mean, other than having XR come and join the actions, if you want to, you know, it's the criminalisation of dissent aspect, I suppose, that would be what I would be always looking to get involved with, because the trade unions are the voices of dissent in the workplace, the voices of dissent in society whenever there's been attempts to impose things that don't take into consideration that it's going to impact people unequally. So for this, I suppose, you know, take comparisons for Catalan referendum 2017, about suppression of democracy. So for any government to group an activist group such as XR as a terrorist threat, that's the criminalisation of dissent. That's something we actually need to give a shit about. Other concrete actions, I suppose, I mean, like I was talking about with the Trades Council's campaigns, and some people seem to agree with me in the comments, the Trades Councils can be more political than the unions can be at this moment in time. Get your local Trades Council on board. See if you don't have a campaign, take one of their campaigns. Take the public transport campaign, take the retrofitting campaign, make it fit your city, your borough. Don't make it too complex. Don't make it too hard. You know, I mean, the jobs actually exist. Just point to the jobs and say, why won't you make those jobs? This is actually what's going to create a solution. This will create a genuine climate solution. This will create more taxable revenue. You know, give people. Unfortunately, we have to hand the answers to the politicians, because they genuinely don't know what they're doing, or they're actively blocking what we're doing. I suppose I'll leave with, I mean, the fact that we're not going to achieve net zero, we're not going to achieve carbon neutrality without making radical proposals, right? And I suppose you take a, I don't know if take a leaf out of Milton Friedman's book is a correct terminology, but it was Milton Friedman who, whenever they were trying to get the neoliberal policies in, was always say, take advantage of a crisis. Either a real or perceived crisis is whenever things change. So we can change this in the direction of the working class and in the direction that we want to see it in, or it'll run right over us. So really, guys, we need to get in and about it. And that means using the established plans and campaigns that we've already got going. Take this, and I suppose we need to step it up over the course of the rest of 2020 and into 2021. So by the time that everybody comes to Glasgow in just over a year's time, that we're all fighting for this and we're all ready to go. Cheers.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you so much. Dorothy said in her final comments that climate is the fight of our lives, and we have to absolutely fight to ensure that this is front and centre of our trade union campaigning in the next few months. Jobs and the environment are not mutually exclusive. They're completely compatible. There is a money tree, and that now needs to be shaken so it can deliver the infrastructure transformation and the different kind of radical changes that we need to make our communities safe for our climate and for our health. Thank you so much to everybody who's participated. It was great to hear lots of people speak today for a change. Can I invite you all to Campaign Against Climate Change? Our trade union group meets this coming Saturday on the 19th of September at 10:30. Please join our Google group that Claire put the link to in the chat earlier, and we will meet for a working meeting on Saturday. 2 key agenda items will be jobs, climate jobs, and COP26. So you're very welcome to join us on the 19th of September. And so thanks just to everybody for joining this afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I think we'll end the meeting there. Thanks all. Panelists can unmute themselves.